2 Corinthians chapter 1, and I want you to notice what it says in verse 3. It says, "Blessed be God, even the Father of from the Lord, or Father of the Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of mercies, and the God of all comfort, who comforteth us in all our tribulations, that we may be able to comfort them which are in any trouble by the comfort wherewith we ourselves are comforted of God." So notice, God is our comfort, and we are to take that comfort that we have learned from and to show comfort to other people. And it says, "For as the sufferings of Christ abound in us, so our consolation also aboundeth by Christ." So Paul suffered things that you and I can't imagine. Paul abounded in suffering, but he also abounded in consolation. And it says, "And whether we be afflicted, it is for your consolation and salvation, which is effectual in the enduring of the same sufferings, which we also suffer, or whether we be comforted, it is for your consolation and salvation. And our hope of you is steadfast, knowing that as ye are partakers of the sufferings, so shall ye be also of the consolation. For we would not, brethren, have you ignorant of our trouble, which came to us in Asia." So he's like, I want you to know what we dealt with in Asia and what we went through. And listen to what Paul said about the trouble that they had in Asia. He said, "And that we were pressed out of measure above strength." I mean, this was more than we could handle. "Insomuch that we despaired even of life." You know what he was basically saying? It got so bad, we wanted to die. They despaired even of life. "But we had the sentence of death in ourselves, that we should not trust in ourselves, but in God which raiseth the dead, who delivered us from so great a death, and doth deliver, in whom we trust that he will deliver us. Ye also, helping together by prayer for us, that for the gift bestowed upon us by the means of many persons, thanks may be given by many on our behalf." And so, even though they despaired of life and he wanted to die, there was something in them that helped them get through it. And it was God. There was hope that was given them. It was these other people that would be benefited, that would be blessed, that would be helped. And their prayers. He was like, your prayers helped make a difference in getting us through this time that was so bad we wanted to die. And I want to preach a message today. I'm calling it suicide prevention. Suicide prevention. I want to preach a series of messages too, just dealing with and helping us have a biblical mindset when it comes to what our world would call mental health issues. Okay? And understand, I'm not saying there's no such thing as mental health issues. Okay? Modern psychology has created many categories of things that they would call mental illness. And I don't think it's wrong for them to do that. And I'm not here today to correct the psychologists and the psychiatrists of the world today. But what I do want to do in these messages is try to look at these things that they're discussing with a biblical mindset. I want us to have a biblical perspective when it comes to these things. Because there's the way our world speaks of things, but then there's the way the Bible speaks of things. And no one will argue the fact that things like bipolar disorder, obsessive-compulsive disorder, these are modern terms. They weren't even around 100 years ago. You know, these are labels that we have put on people who have certain behaviors. But understand, these terms, while they didn't exist 100 years ago, the characteristics, the behaviors have always existed. They've always been around. It's always been a thing. So the big question is, if you or someone you know is struggling with one of these mental illnesses, how do you know where to go to in the scriptures to help in these areas? Because obviously, if you look up PTSD and ESORD or bipolar disorder, you're not going to find it in your King James Bible. These are modern terms, but I do think it's important that we look at the problems people are facing with those things, but then our minds need to go to the words of God when we see these things and when we hear about these things so we can get help. And so what I want to do in this message, we're going to look at a specific action that is very common today. You know, the subject of suicide, it's a very sensitive thing because I imagine probably almost everybody in here knows somebody, you know, who has committed suicide. And it is a devastating thing. I mean, for over a year I've been meaning to preach on this, but it's like I don't want to look like I'm targeting any one instance and one individual. And it's just like I keep hearing new stories and I don't want to look like this is all inspired by that one story. It's just, I keep hearing things. I keep finding out about different people that either committed suicide, attempted suicide, thinking about committing suicide. And it's a terrible thing. It's a terrible place for some. And let me just say too, suicide is never a good solution. It's a selfish decision because people don't take into consideration how it affects everyone around them that loves them. And it is devastating. And I have talked to so many people who were just ripped to pieces with guilt because somebody they love committed suicide. And at the end of the day, it was the individual's choice that did that. But I do think if we want to help, and people wonder, what could I have done to help? And obviously, we can't make everyone's decisions for them. We can't live other people's lives. It's their decision. But I do think there are some attributes that God expects us as Christians to have that I believe can be a help in this area so we can be a help to people. Because I know this, I don't want anybody I love committing suicide. I don't want anybody that you love committing suicide. It's just a very devastating thing. So we're going to look at this action in the Bible. And we're going to look at how the Bible explains what many people would call a mental disorder today. Because typically, too, when you hear about somebody committing suicide, people will often talk about how they were battling mental illness. And listen, mental illness, for lack of a better term, it's a real thing. I mean, pain in the mind is real pain. Struggles in the mind, in the emotions, and the heart are real things. And trying to diagnose something like that, it's a very, very difficult thing. And so I don't want anybody to think that I'm like knocking what people who study these things are coming up with. I'm just trying to look at this from a biblical perspective. Whenever I talk about things that cause suicide, what can prevent suicide, I want to use the words of God in these because I believe that is the most effective way to do these things. And so what I want to do to start these things out, I want us to look at all the examples of suicide in the Bible, and I want us to notice some common things in there because I think this can be very helpful. And so the first one we're going to look at is in Judges chapter 9. A man named Abimelech, it says in verse 52, and Abimelech came near unto the tower and fought against it and went hard unto the door of the tower to burn it with fire. And a certain woman cast a piece of millstone upon Abimelech's head and all to break his skull. Then he called hastily unto the young man his armor-bearer and said unto him, Draw thy sword and slay me, that men say not of me, a woman slew him. And his young man thrust him through, and he died. And when the men of Israel saw that Abimelech was dead, they departed every man into his place. So notice in this story, he gets wounded, and he's going to die. Okay? I think he realizes, I have received a wound that I am not going to recover from. And notice, he doesn't want it to be said in the future that a woman killed him. And so he's just like, he tells the young man, kill me. Take me now and slay me. Now, this did not work because years and years and years later in 2 Samuel 11:20, we're not going to take time to read the story, but when David wanted Uriah killed, Joab had him go and fight the battle in a way that would be very likely to get him killed. And it did get him killed. And so he told the man who was going to give David the message. He's like, now when you explain to David, what happened in this battle that we lost, make sure you mention Uriah's dead. And let's go and read part of it. So it says in 2 Samuel 11:20, because when he hears the method I used, he's going to get upset because, and if it so be that the king's wrath arise, and he say unto thee, Wherefore approach ye so nigh unto the city when ye did fight? Know ye not that they would shoot from the wall? Who smote Abimelech, the son of Jerubbesheth? Did not a woman cast a piece of a millstone upon him from the wall that he died in Thebez? Why went ye nigh unto the wall? Then say thou, thy servant Uriah the Hittite is dead also. So he knew, it's like, hey, we all know that you never go close to the wall in battle because then even a woman can kill you in that situation. Because remember Abimelech? And so but again, he said, just tell him Uriah is dead and then he'll calm down. Because that's what he wanted to do. So this didn't work. But here's the thing. When Abimelech wanted to die, notice, okay, as he was dying, that he's feeling shame. I got wounded by a woman.
It was shame, and he knows I'm not going to recover. He had no hope. He is in despair. He is in a state of despair and shame, and knew that there was no positive future for him. And so he thought, in his mind, the best thing, just kill me right now, and then people won't say a woman killed me. Now, it didn't work. He was wrong. And you know, most people, when they commit suicide, what they think it's going to accomplish, it's not going to accomplish that. You know, but again, they are typically, and in the Bible, we're going to see this every time, they are in a state many times of shame and despair. And listen, good people can feel shame and despair. The Apostle Paul, I mean, he despaired even of his life. He suffered shame all the time. The Apostle Paul, you better believe, he often faced those very emotions, and that is the emotion that we see of Abimelech. We see shame and despair. He has no hope for the future. Samson is another example in Judges 16, verse 29. You know the story of Samson. He's this mighty warrior. He's somebody that everybody feared. He has this great strength, but he ends up getting in trouble. He ends up getting his eyes put out. And it says in Judges 16:29, and Samson took hold on the two middle pillars upon which the house stood. Remember when they brought him out to make sport of him. This guy that they one time feared, they now had control over him. He was a servant to them, and they bring him out in the midst of thousands to shame him. He is being mocked and he is being shamed, and he's resting on these two pillars. And it says, and Samson said, praying to God, let me die with the Philistines. And he bowed himself with all his might, and the house fell upon the lords and upon all the people that were therein. So the dead which he slew at his death were more than they which slew in his life. Samson is at a point where he's like, I have no strength. I don't have my eyes. He's being shamed. He has no hope for his future. But he did. He makes a plea to God, Lord, give me strength one more time, and let me fight one more battle, and so I can be avenged of my two eyes. And he did, and he died right there. Notice Samson is feeling shame and despair. He has no hope for his future. And God was merciful to him, and God gave him this great victory. And he died in there, but it was a result of, again, he had disobeyed God several times. God gave him several opportunities, and he just wasn't paying attention. But again, we have shame and despair. We see King Saul and his armor bearer. In 1 Samuel 31:3, it says, and the battle went sore against Saul, and the archers hit him, and he was sore wounded of the archers. Then said Saul unto his armor bearer, draw thy sword, and thrust me through therewith, lest these uncircumcised come and thrust me through and abuse me. But his armor bearer would not, for he was sore afraid. Therefore Saul took a sword and fell upon it. And when his armor bearer saw that Saul was dead, he fell likewise upon his sword and died with him. So Saul died, and his 3 sons, and his armor bearer, and all his men that same day together. And chances are, in this story, Saul probably wasn't going to survive long term, but he felt that a worse death would be awaiting him if he stayed alive and the Philistines get a hold of him. Saul's been an enemy of the Philistines for a long time, and it's not going to be pretty if they get a hold of him. This is another act of despair. Also, his sons are dead. He's like, my sons are dead. He doesn't want to go on living when his sons are dead. He's wounded. They've lost the battle. He knows a worse death awaits. And that often is where people are at when they commit suicide. They are at a point of despair where they have no hope that things are going to get better. And sometimes maybe they're right. Saul was actually being judged. Saul for sure should have been feeling shame at this time. He's being judged by God for his rebellion. And here Saul has to look at his armies that are being defeated, his sons that are dead because of his sin. And you better believe he was feeling shame on that day. He's wounded. He knows I'm not able to fight anymore. If these Philistines get me, I'm going to be tortured. It's going to be an even worse death. And so he did. He just fell on his sword and killed himself. We have Ahithophel. In 2 Samuel 17:23, Ahithophel was a man who was very wise. He was a very wise counselor to David. When they would get counsel from him, it was as though one got it from the oracles of God. And Ahithophel is now advising Absalom, David's enemy, his own son. And it says And when Ahithophel saw that his counsel was not followed, he saddled his ass and arose and gat him home to his house, to his city, and put his household in order, and hanged himself, and died, and was buried in the sepulchre of his father. Now, why did he do this? Was he just throwing a big fit? No. Ahithophel was a very wise man, and Ahithophel knew that when Absalom did not follow his counsel, he knew he's going to lose. And I've been working with the enemy. He saw the handwriting on the wall. He's like, man, David's going to win this battle, and he is not going to be happy with me. He is going to want to punish me severely. Ahithophel, for sure, is feeling shame and despair. He's like, I have no hope in my future. David will not let this go. And so he went, set things out, set his house in order, and he's like, if I'm going to go, I'm going on my own terms. And he killed himself. He hung himself. And so another example we have is Zimri. Zimri was a king. We read all the story, we're not going to do it. He became king by conspiring against King Elah. Elah, he was another bad king of Israel in the northern kingdom, but Zimri was also a bad guy. And he's a great example of you reap what you sow. The way he became king was bad, but it says in 1 Kings 16:8, and in the 26th year of Asa, king of Judah, began Elah, the son of Baasha, to reign over Israel in Tirzah 2 years. And his servant Zimri, captain of half his chariot, conspired against him, and he was in Tirzah, drinking himself drunk in the house of Arza, steward of his house in Tirzah. And Zimri went in and smote him and killed him in the 27th year of Asa, king of Judah, and reigned in his stead. And it came to pass when he began to reign, as soon as he sat on the throne, that he slew all the house of Baasha, left him not one that pisseth against the wall, neither of his kinfolk nor of his friends. Thus did Zimri destroy all the house of Baasha, according to the word of the Lord, which he spake against Baasha by Jehu the prophet. For all the sins of Baasha and the sins of Elah his son, which they had sinned, and by which they made Israel to sin, and provoking the Lord God of Israel to anger with their vanities. Now the rest of the acts of Elah, and all that he did, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the king of Israel? And in the 27th year of Asa, king of Judah, did Zimri reign 7 days. So he does all this sneaky stuff to become king. He's able to be king for 1 week, 7 days. And the people were encamped against Gibbethon, which belonged to the Philistines. And all the people that were encamped heard say, Zimri hath conspired, and hath also slain the king. Wherefore all Israel made Omri captain of the host, king over Israel that day in the camp. And Omri went up from Gibbethon, and all Israel with him, and they besieged Tirzah. And it came to pass when Zimri saw that the city was taken, he went into the palace of the king's house, and burnt the king's house over him with fire, and died. For his sins which he sinned, in doing evil in the sight of the Lord, and walking in the way of Jeroboam, and in the sin which he did to make Israel to sin. Basically what happened here, Zimri went through all these sneaky avenues to become king. He sacrificed it all to become king. He gave everything to become king. He's king for a whole week, and he realizes, I'm dead meat. I'm going to lose it, and you know what? If I can't be king, if I can't have this house, nobody can have it. And what does he do? He burns it down and himself in it with him. He's like, I'm taking it with me. This, again, we have despair. I don't know if there's a whole lot of shame here. Maybe there's some shame, too, in the way he got it. But I think maybe he knew better to get his followers to fight nobly, because that's not how this guy was. But he's an interesting story. But this is, without a doubt, another act of desperation. Judas Iscariot, Matthew 27:3. Then Judas, which had betrayed him, when he saw that he was condemned, repented himself, and brought again the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests and elders, saying, I have sinned, in that I have betrayed the innocent blood. And they said, what is that to us? See thou to that. And he cast the pieces of silver in the temple, and departed, and went and hanged himself. Judas was ashamed of what he had done. I mean, folks, he betrayed Jesus. He is a close disciple of Jesus. He betrayed him. He did it in a dirty way. He betrayed him with a kiss. He did it just for 30 pieces of silver. And he was ashamed of himself. He saw no future. He saw no hope for himself. And what did he do? He went and he hanged himself. And so shame, it's a painful sensation excited by a consciousness of guilt, or of having done something which injures reputation, or by of that which nature or modesty prompts us to conceal. Shame is particularly excited by the disclosure of actions which in the view of men are mean and degrading. Hence it is often or always manifested by a downcast look or by blushes called confusion of face. And that is where many people are when they commit suicide. They're in a state of shame and despair. Despair is hopelessness, a hopeless state, a destitution of hope or expectation. And the Webster's 1828, for as an example, it uses 2 Corinthians 4:8. We are perplexed, but not in despair. And so I want to preach this again because unfortunately, I've dealt with too many people who have greatly suffered pain as a result of a loved one taking their own life. And it's such a foolish act. It's a selfish act. It does not accomplish what people think it's going to accomplish. But let me tell you, when you are in that state of shame and despair, you are not in a good place to be making decisions. And so we can't be surprised when people make bad decisions. And it's always a bad decision. It's always wrong. It's always foolish when they do it. It's not your fault when they do these things, but it can't help us from just wondering if we could have done something. Could I have done something different? Could I have helped in some way? And again, we can't be responsible for whatever he does in our lives. We have to live our own lives. They have to live their own lives. But if there is anything that we can do, I do think there are some attributes that just happen to be things that God wants us to have in our lives as Christians that can help. Because if shame and despair are some of the main motivators for suicide, well then, if we can help people not have shame and despair, if we can be people who give others hope, if we can be people who are good at restoring people, then it's going to be less likely the people in our lives are going to commit suicide. And so a few things I want to point out that we need to have in our life is as an individual, as a church, as a family. And one, we need to be people where a prodigal can return without getting beat up. We've got to be that as a people. In Luke 15:17, the prodigal, when he's eating with the hogs, it says, when he came to himself, he said, how many hired servants of my father's have bread enough to spare, and I perish with hunger? I will arise and go to my father, and will say unto him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before thee, and am no more worthy to be called thy son. Make me as one of thy hired servants. That prodigal son, he saw a better potential future than where he was at then. He was at a low point in his life, and when he got to that low point, he didn't say, it can only get worse. He's like, no, I see something better. You know what he saw? He saw being a servant of his father. He's like, man, my father's servants live and eat better than I live and eat right now. I've already blown my inheritance, but you know what? I'll just go and my father, he will be merciful and he will let me be a servant. And folks, you know the story frontwards and backwards. Not only did he got treated better than a servant. He treated him like a son. He put that robe on him. He put a ring on his hand, a symbol of authority. He went and killed the fatted calf for his son. He was thrilled. When he sees his son a great way off, his father runs out to him and falls on his neck and kisses him. That's what happened to the prodigal son. The prodigal, when he hit a low point in his life, not only did he see it with his father a better potential future for him, when he went back to his father, it was even better than he thought. And that's how we ought to be as Christians. We ought to be a people that when somebody messes up and when somebody faces that shame, you know what? They ought to know that, yeah, okay, I'm ashamed, but you know what? I don't need to be in despair. I could go back. I won't be able to do what I did before. Maybe I might not be able to be restored or hold a position that I once held. It might not be exactly like it was, but you know what? It'll be better than where I'm at right now. And you know what? When people come back, they ought to find out it's better than they thought. That's what we see in this story. We've got to be a people that provide that. We need to be a church that provides that. People, when they leave and they get out of the will of God and they get involved in sin, obviously that's a really bad thing. But you know what? They should always be able to come back and get there. And this ought to be a place where we will help them get their life on track. And so we can't have this critical, condemning spirit towards others. What do we see in verse 27? This is the older brother. And he said unto him, or the father speaking to the older brother, said unto him, thy brother is come, and thy father hath killed the fatted calf, because he hath received him safe and sound, or it was the servant speaking to the older brother. And he was angry and would not go in. Therefore came his father out and entreated him. And he answered and said to his father, Lo, these many years do I serve thee. I never did all that junk that he did. He said, I neither did transgressed I at any time at thy commandment, and yet thou never gavest me a kid that I might make merry with my friends. But as soon as thy son was come, which hath devoured thy living with harlots, thou hast killed for him the fatted calf. So notice that condemning, that critical spirit of the older brother, who is a representation of the Pharisees, who were being critical and condemning towards these sinners that were coming to Christ for forgiveness. And let me tell you, if that's the kind of church we are, where we just cream everybody that messes up, there's no place for them to be restored, no place for them to be returned, you know what? They're going to be more likely to feel despair. If you're like that in your family, if you're just ready to write somebody off at the drop of a hat, any failure that they do, you mark them a reprobate, you're done, you're never going to have anything to do with them again. Listen, don't be surprised one of these days when your children mess up, if you just cream everybody in the church that messes up anyway, I'm never going to have anything to do with them again. You're just constantly writing everybody off. One of these days, your kids are going to be the ones that are going to mess up. Your kids are going to be the ones that sin. They're going to feel shame, and they're also going to feel despair, because my home is definitely not a place where there's any restoration. My home is not a place where you can be restored, you can come back. My home is a place where you get condemned, and when you mess up, you're done. Everybody's done with you. You're never getting any forgiveness. You know what? I see no hope. I see no future. And they're killing themselves. And that kind of thing happens a lot of times. Don't be that way. If you are constantly condemning, if you are constantly throwing stones, don't be surprised one of these days when your kid's like, I can't go to my parents. I can't talk to them about what I'm dealing with. Don't be surprised when that happens. And let me tell you something about us independent, fundamental, hardcore, King James only Baptists. You know, sometimes we talk a lot tougher than we actually are. I talked about that a little bit in Sunday school. You know, we like to do the chest thumping. It's called insecurity. Let me tell you something. You want to know what dogs bark the most? Chihuahuas. That's reality. Why is it that the little dogs make the most noise? You know why? Because they got to prove something. Those big dogs, they don't have to do that much. They're big. They've got the sharp teeth. Hey, Dawn, remember that dog? Does that dog still live by you? That big, huge dog that I was always scared of, does that still live by you?
He passed away.
Oh, okay. I can go visit that house now. But she told me that dog was super nice and everything. Listen, yeah. Yeah. I never knocked on that house. That dog was always out there, and it was huge. And it looked terrifying, and it never barked at me. It didn't have to. But, you know, I go up to houses all the time with those little yap dogs. And let me tell you, a lot of you independent fundamental Baptists, you're Chihuahuas. You're yap dogs. You're always out there yapping about how against everything you are. You're always out there on Facebook just, creaming everything, condemning everybody in the world. But let me tell you, the real tough people, they don't have to do it. Everybody just knows. You see Chuck Norris going around throwing out threats? He doesn't have to. He is the threat. Right? So, that's how it is for the real hardcore people. I hate to invoke Chuck Norris. But anyway, we need to be a place where prodigals can return without getting beat up. Also, we need to be providers of hope. People give up when they have no hope. Hope not only keeps us going, but listen, turn over to Hebrews 11. I love this verse, okay? When people end up killing themselves, they have no hope that things are going to get better. In their minds, they are in such a bad place, continuing to live is worse. That is despair. That's why Paul said, we even despair of life. Let's not get it in our heads that only bad people think this way. No, even the Apostle Paul felt this way. He despaired even of life. But let me tell you, it's always a lie of the devil. It can be better. It can always be better, especially for us as Christians, and we've got to be those providers of hope. But notice in Hebrews 11:35, it says, women received their dead, raised to life again, and others were tortured, not accepting deliverance, that they might obtain a better resurrection. Notice how King Saul killed himself seeing torture in the future, right? And so he despaired, he killed himself. We see that in the Bible, people who only see worse coming in their lives. Where in this story, these people died. Why? even though earthly speaking, worse things were ahead, they had hope of the future. They knew, hey, if I endure this, I will have a better resurrection. In the case of these people in Hebrews 11 who had faith, it was hope that made them willing to die. Think about that. They didn't die. They didn't go out like a coward. They didn't go and deny the Lord. They went, and hope actually caused them to be obedient even unto death. And and those of us who believe that we might have to face real persecution, physical persecution, and death. Why do we say that we will do these things? Because we believe in a reward. We believe in a heaven. We believe in a coming kingdom of Christ where we are going to rule and reign with Him. We believe in all those things. You know what all that is? That's called hope. We have hope that there's something better. And so even these people who are being tortured, and they could have died. They could have died earlier. And that's what often they would do. We will kill you right now if you'll recant. We'll kill you right now and have mercy if you'll say what we want you to say. But they said, no, I'll take the torture. You know why? Because they had hope of something better in the future. Hope is what made them do that. Folks, we are supposed to be a people of hope. We are supposed to be a place where people can come and learn about the hope that we have in Christ. We need people in our church. We've got to have people in our church who have overcome great hardships, who have overcome great shame. We need you to be successful. We need you to be happy. You know why? Because most people, they come into church faking it like everything's great in their life, because they think if people in this church find out that I've got all these problems, they're going to condemn me, they're going to hate me. No, we need to be a church where we're okay if people come in and they have some problems, because guess what? We all have some problems, and that's what people figure out. And a lot of people, they come into church and they think this church is great because of what they preach, but then they find out, man, these people in this church have problems. Then what do? They get out. That's a shame. That's not how it's supposed to be. That's not a Christian attitude. That is not the attitude of a Christian. And we need people who have suffered shame, been through shameful things. We need you to succeed. That gives us hope. It gives other people hope. We need you to be happy. We need you to have successful marriages. We need you to raise good kids. We need to not shame people because of failure. And now, I probably should preach a whole message just on this, but right now, the generation that always got a trophy are adults. And let me tell you, when every kid's getting a trophy, you're lying to your kids. You're lying when you say everybody's a winner. No, you win some, you lose some. Sometimes you succeed, sometimes you fail. But we've got a generation that doesn't know how to handle failure. We've got a generation that when they do fail, they are so ashamed of themselves that they despair even of life. They're ashamed. And the King James, it doesn't, I talked about this Wednesday, it doesn't use the word fail like we do today. It used it differently. The word that it used, it would be the word fall. And what does it say in falling? Not just like falling over. It means to fail. That's how we would use the word today. In Proverbs 24:16, what does it say? For a just man falleth 7 times and riseth up again. But the wicked shall fall into mischief. Rejoice not when thine enemy falleth, and let not thine heart be glad when he stumbleth, lest the Lord see it and it displease him, and he turn away his wrath from him. And so when we see that, just what we've got to teach our kids is that, hey, you're going to fail. Listen, you're going to fail. You're going to mess up. You're not going to succeed. You're going to get fired from your job. You're going to fail in this area. You might fail in school. You might flunk out. We are all going to fail. But listen, you are not. You can still be a just man while failing as long as you keep going. As long as you don't quit. And people do. They fail in their marriage. They fail in their Christian life. They fail. And we've been so conditioned that no, we're all winners, we're all winners, we're all winners. Eventually reality sets in, no, I failed. And they don't know how to handle it. Listen, your kids need to learn how to handle failure. You know what? Kids need to see red ink on their test with a great big F on there. And they need to be told, you failed. Oh, we're going to hurt these kids if we talk. Well, you're going to hurt them worse if you let them grow up never experiencing failure, because guess what? We all fail. And when people fail, it shouldn't be an earth-ending thing for them. You know what? Just say, all right, I got to go again. I got to try again. And people do. They fail in the ministry. A lot of people, they do. They fail in the ministry. You know what they do after that? They quit. I failed. Okay, yeah, you failed. But you know what? Yeah, you fell. A just man falls 7 times, but he riseth up again. And you know, and so we need to understand when somebody does fall, when somebody does fail, we definitely shouldn't rejoice over that kind of thing. God does not appreciate that. You know what we ought to do? We ought to encourage people, try again. Well, but this guy's failed several times. Well, just keep trying. Just keep on trying. Well, once he gets to the 8th, can we nail him? I don't think that's the point. Okay, I don't think that's the point, and I hope you're not keeping track. Okay, I hope you're not keeping track of everybody's failures, but that is what we've got to do. Many people, they failed in business, and that's typically when they take their life. They're so ashamed of that failure. But 1 Corinthians 10:11 says, now all these things happen unto them for ensamples, and they are written for our admonition, upon whom the ends of the world are come. Wherefore let him that thinketh he standeth take heed, lest he fall. When you see someone else fall, when you see someone else fail, you don't look at that and be like, I didn't do that. No, you look and say, I better watch out. You know, and again, it's okay when somebody else messes up for you to look. It's like, all right, where did they go wrong? Not so we can show our judgment and how good it is. No, so we can make a mental note to ourselves. All right, don't do that, because that could be me too. You know, as a pastor, I'm going to have failures. As a pastor, I observe failures. I observe successes. And it would be wise for me, when I see somebody fail, to make a note. Hey, where did things go wrong? Why? Because that could be me. I don't want that to be me. And so we need to try to learn. And so we don't want to be I think as Baptists, we kind of are like the Japanese with harikari, or as they call it, which is that where they, when they fail or when they're ashamed of themselves, they can kill themselves honorably by disemboweling themselves. And it's like that's what we want to do in the Baptist world. You know, we're so hardcore and everything. It's like we want to teach people when you mess up, just go kill yourself or something. It's like, no, that's something from a godless culture. Unless sometimes we, even as Bible believers, we become overly harsh and critical based on holy laws of God. We have a very condemning attitude towards others and even ourselves, but we need to remember Jesus came and gave his life for a reason. Not just so we could go to heaven, but so we could have a more abundant life on earth. He said, I have come that they might have life and that they might have it more abundantly. And it's amazing how, you know, we're all fine with the fact that we don't get hell that we all deserve, but we want every earthly punishment for everybody else. Not ourselves, of course. You know, we're fine with ourselves getting mercy, but Jesus said, I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd giveth his life for the sheep. He didn't just do these things and pay for sins so you can go to heaven. He wants you to have a good life even on this earth. And so again, even if you're sinful and worthy of death, just understand God still loves you. He can still use you. There's hope. You don't have to kill yourself. The devil, judgmental Christians, they will not provide hope, but God does. The woman taken in adultery, she deserved to die. Jesus didn't tell her she didn't deserve to die, but Jesus didn't condemn her, and he did say, go and sin no more. The law already had her condemned, but yet she had a chance to go on and do right again, and Jesus said, go and live no more. And if you failed in your life, in your marriage, in your ministry, in your parenting, in business, just understand, we could probably say a lot of bad things about you that are true. But that doesn't mean there isn't hope, because we have something, ladies and gentlemen, called redemption, called forgiveness of sins through Christ. And it's okay for you to every once in a while just humble yourself and go to the welfare center of heaven. And it's like, hey, I messed up bad. I need another bailout. You know, we all slam the banks for going to the government for bailouts. And that's fine. You know why? Because the government doesn't have any money. They have our money. And we don't want to bail them out because we can't afford it either. But God is rich in grace. He's rich and abundant in mercy. You know why? Because the blood of Christ, it paid for all sins. He has that wealth. And if you want to go to the Lord every now and then and say, Lord, I need to cash in again because I messed up. Humble yourself, go to the welfare office of heaven and accept that forgiveness. Accept that. God can give it to you. There is hope. You can make it. You can still do something for God. And we've got to make sure people understand that forgiven people are supposed to be forgiving. But Pharisees aren't. You know why? And in the Bible, it's because the Pharisees weren't even truly forgiven. They thought they were. They didn't think they needed forgiveness. But those who've been forgiven a great debt, they're ready to forgive. And I wouldn't wish the pain or trial of a loved one committing suicide on anyone. And just understand, when they do it, it's not your fault. Okay? Ultimately, it's their decision. It's on them. It was a choice, and it was a bad choice. It was one that was an act of shame and an act of desperation. And I do see in the Bible, that is the theme. With every suicide we see in the Bible, and as Christians, we have a job of being promoters and providers of hope, forgiveness, and for restoration. Shame and despair are messages of the devil, and he's a liar and the father of it. He's the one saying it can't get better. He's the one saying death is a better option for you, but Satan is a liar. And what you are feeling, that shame and despair, that is a real feeling that has come on some of the greatest Christians that ever lived. But at the same time, you know what you've got to do when you feel that? You've got to have a source of hope. And you've got to have something that can help you get rid of that shame. Well, you know what? Christ took your shame for you on the cross. Take it to Him. Go to Him for forgiveness. Go to Him for hope. He can provide that. And don't let Satan use you as other people to tell a lie. Again, let's not be the ones condemning everybody. Let's not one bringing everybody down. Even the Apostle Paul came to a point where he despaired of his life, but it was the promises of God that got him through it. That was his source of hope, and this could happen to any of us. And so we've got to make sure that we do these things, that we be a place where prodigals can return to without getting beat up. We be providers of hope. We be promoters of hope. We show that forgiveness to people, and it's not going to guarantee it, because people can go, they're going to do what they want. They're going to make their own choices. We can't control everyone's feelings, but those are the feelings typically. And so I know, just like I want to see all my children get saved, you know what? I want to make sure too that my children are prepared and equipped, and they know how to handle failure, and that they know that forgiveness, that restoration is always available. And so, I try to be careful, not just condemning. If I'm just, every time somebody does something I don't like, those people ought to kill themselves. Well, one of these days, my kids do something I don't like. Well, that's what my dad always thought people ought to do when they do these types of things. I'm going to go kill myself. And then it's like, no, not my kids. No, that's everybody else. No, that's not the right attitude. So I hope this was a help and a blessing. Let's pray. Dear Lord, I pray you'll help all of us to follow these things we talked about in this message today. Lord, as Christians, it is easy to just get caught up in the things of the world and to let the devil lie to us and to just have an overly harsh and condemning spirit and attitude. It's easy for us to get caught up in those feelings of shame and despair and not knowing how to deal with failure and things. But I pray, Lord, you'll help us to just hang on to the promises of your word during those difficult times like Paul did. And Lord, in these good days, I pray you'll help us to be people who are providers of hope, promoters of hope. I pray that our church will be a place where prodigals can be restored, and so when people do mess up, Lord, they won't just give up, but they'll realize you paid for their sins and there is hope in you. In your name we pray. Amen.